I'm going to a funeral today. There you go. When he heard this, Bilbo was all in a flutter, for he saw that luck was with him, and he had a chance at once to try his desperate plan. He followed the two elves until they entered a small cellar and sat down at a table on which two large flagons were set. Soon they began to drink and laugh merrily. Luck of an unusual kind was with Bilbo then. It must be potent wine to make a wood elf drowsy, but this wine, it would seem, was the heady vintage of the great gardens of Dorwinion, not meant for his soldiers or his servants, but for the king's feasts only, and for smaller bowls, not for the butler's great flagons. Very soon the chief guard nodded his head, and then he laid it on the table and fell fast asleep. The butler went on talking and laughing to himself for a while without seeming to notice, but soon his head too nodded on the table, and he fell asleep and snored beside his friend. Then in crept the Hobbit. Very soon the chief guard had no keys, but Bilbo was trotting as fast as he could along the passages towards the cells. The great bunch seemed very heavy to his arms, and his heart was often in his mouth, in spite of his ring, for he could not prevent the keys from making every now and then a loud clink and clank, which put him all in a tremble. First he unlocked Balin's door, and locked it again carefully as soon as the dwarf was outside. Balin was most surprised, you can imagine, but glad as he was to get out of his wearisome little stone room, he wanted to stop and ask questions and know what Bilbo was going to do and all about it. "No time now," said the Hobbit. "You just follow me. We must all keep together and not risk getting separated. All of us must escape at once, or none, and this is our last chance. If this is found out, goodness knows where the king will put you next, with chains on your hands and feet too, I expect. Don't argue, there's a good fellow." Then off he went from door to door, until his following had grown to 12, none of them any too nimble, what with the dark and what with their long imprisonment. Bilbo's heart thumped every time one of them bumped into another, or grunted or whispered in the dark. "Oh, drat this dwarfish racket," he said to himself. But all went well, and they met no guards. As a matter of fact, there was a great autumn feast in the woods that night, and in the halls above. Nearly all the king's folk were merry-making. At last, after much blundering, they came to Thorin's dungeon, far down in a deep place, and fortunately not far from the cellars. "Upon my word," said Thorin, when Bilbo whispered to him to come out and join his friends. "Gandalf spoke true, as usual. A pretty fine burglar you make it seems, when the time comes. I am sure we are all forever at your service, whatever happens after this. But what comes next?" Bilbo saw that the time had come to explain his idea as far as he could, but he did not feel at all sure how the dwarves would take it. His fears were quite justified, for they did not like it a bit, and started grumbling loudly in spite of their danger. "We shall be bruised and battered to pieces, and drowned too, for certain," they muttered. "We thought you got some sensible notion when you managed to get hold of the keys. This is a mad idea." "Oh, very well," said Bilbo, very downcast and also rather annoyed. "Come along back to your nice cells, and I will lock you all in again. You can sit there comfortably and think of a better plan. But I don't suppose I shall ever get hold of the keys again, even if I feel inclined to try." That was too much for them, and they calmed down. In the end, of course, they had to do just what Bilbo suggested, because it was obviously impossible for them to try and find their way into the upper halls, or to fight their way out of gates that closed by magic. And it was no good grumbling in the passages until they were caught again. So, following the Hobbit, down into the lowest cellars they crept. They passed a door through which the chief guard and the butler could be seen, still happily snoring with smiles upon their faces. The wine of Dorwinion brings deep and pleasant dreams. There would be a different expression on the face of the chief guard next day, even though Bilbo, before they went on, stole in and kind-heartedly put the keys back on his belt. "That will save him some of the trouble he's in for," said Mr. Baggins to himself. "He wasn't a bad fellow, and quite decent to the prisoners. It'll puzzle them all too. They will think we had a very strong magic to pass through all those locked doors and disappear. Disappear? We've got to get busy very quick if that's to happen." Balin was told off to watch the guard and the butler and give warning if they stirred. The rest went into the adjoining cellar with the trapdoors. Adjoining cellar, sorry. There was little time to lose. Before long, as Bilbo knew, some elves were under orders to come down and help the butler get the empty barrels through the doors into the stream. These were, in fact, already standing in rows in the middle of the floor, waiting to be pushed off. Some of them were wine barrels, and these were not much use, as they could not easily be opened at the end without a great deal of noise, nor could they easily be secured again. But among them were several others which had been used for bringing other stuffs, butter, apples, and all sorts of things, to the king's palace. They soon found 13 with room enough for a dwarf in each. In fact, some were too roomy, and as they climbed in, the dwarves thought anxiously of the shaking and the bumping they would get inside, although Bilbo did his best to find straw and other stuff to pack them in as cosily as could be managed in a short time. At last 12 dwarfs were stowed. Thorin had given a lot of trouble, and turned and twisted in his tub and grumbled like a large dog in a small kennel, while Balin, who came last, made a great fuss about his air holes, and said he was stifling even before his lid was on. Bilbo had done what he could to close holes in the sides of the barrels, and to fix on all the lids as safely as could be managed, and now he was left alone again, running around putting the finishing touches to the packing, and hoping against hope that his plan would come off. It had not been done a bit too soon. Only a minute or two after Balin's lid had been fitted on, there came the sound of voices and the flicker of lights. A number of elves came laughing and talking into the cellars, then singing snatches of song. They had left a merry feast in one of the halls, and were bent on returning as soon as they could. "Where's old Gallian the butler?" said one. "I haven't seen him at the tables tonight. He ought to be here now to show us what is to be done." "I shall be angry if the old slow coach is late," said another. "I have no wish to waste time down here while the song is up." "Ha ha!" came a cry. "Here's the old villain with his head on a jug. He's been having a little feast all to himself, and his friend the captain." "Shake him, wake him!" shouted the others impatiently. Gallian was not at all pleased at being shaken or wakened, and still less at being laughed at. "You're late," he grumbled. "Here am I waiting and waiting down here, while you fellows drink and make merry and forget your tasks. Small wonder if I fall asleep from weariness." "Small wonder," said they, "when the explanation stands close at hand, in a jug. Come and give us a taste of your sleeping draught before we fall to. No need to wake the turnkey yonder. He has had his share by the looks of it." Then they drank once round and became mighty merry all of a sudden. But they did not quite lose their wits. "Save us, Gallian," cried some. "You began your feasting early and muddled your wits. You have stacked some full casks here instead of the empty ones, if there is anything in weight." "Get on with the work," growled the butler. "There is nothing in the feeling of weight in an idle tosspot's arms. These are the ones to go, and no others. Do as I say." "Very well, very well," they answered, rolling the barrels to the opening. "On your head be it, if the king's full butter tubs and his best wine is pushed into the river for the lake men to feast on for nothing." Roll, 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 rolling down the hole. Heave ho, splash, plump, down they go, down they bump. So they sang, as first one barrel and then another rumbled to the dark opening and was pushed over into the cold water some feet below. Some were barrels really empty, some were tubs neatly packed with a dwarf each, but down they all went, one after another, with many a clash and a bump, thudding on top of ones below, smacking into the water, jostling against the walls of the tunnel, knocking into one another, and bobbing away down the current. That's all for now.